Hello, everyone. This is Ann Talley. I'd like to welcome you to Innovative's February Hot Topic, where today's topic is Metadata Modernization Basics. We are joined today for our second session by Nannette Naught, who is an Innovative Senior Product Manager in charge of metadata. I'm Ann Talley, as I said, and I'm a senior consultant here at Innovative, and I will be your moderator for today. Joining us today is...
Hi, my name is Bill Topper-Sofer, and I will be your chat moderator for today. So any questions that you send to the chat, I'll be sending on to the panel.
So as we gather today and we advance our slides, you'll get to see a brief photo of what the voices you're going to be hearing for the next 2 hours, what we look like. You'll meet Nannette in a second. So while we're here, let's talk about exactly why we have gathered here for the hot topic and exactly why Innovative is going through and presenting this Beyond the ILS series. We're here to have this conversation about metadata, and a couple of weeks ago, I guess 2 weeks ago now, Nannette helped you face your fears. She spent time talking with us about debunking the key myths behind MARC metadata modernization, and she gave us some groundwork on the basic principles to help us move further, faster with the anticipated change that is happening to our library, happening in our library world. We do want these sessions to be conversational. You have the opportunity to place your thoughts and comments in the chat window. Bill and I will be monitoring those, and we will be presenting them to Nannette and bringing them into the discussion as time permits. We'll also have some time, we hope, at the end of our session to go back and recap anything that may have come in during the chat time, as well as maybe pick up on some of the topics that might have sparked conversation from session 1. So today we're going to be moving forward with metadata modernization, and Nannette is going to provide for us this historical timeline of how we got to where we are today. We're going to talk about moving beyond MARC and other library-related topics. Now, before we get started, let's do a quick communication check. As you entered the meeting room, we did ask you to place where you were logging in from, just so we could just get a sense of how widespread we are. And so this conversation is across the nation, as well as in other countries. So, Bill, what do we have going on here?
Well, we've had Kathy from Berkeley, Eva from London Public Library, London, Ontario, and Martha from Seacock, Massachusetts check in so far. And then if any folks have questions that are stemming from the first session or any topics that you would like to see covered today, please send those in the chat, and we will share those as we go along today and make sure that those are covered by Nannette and shared with the group.
All right, great. Thanks, Bill. And the other things, too, if you post questions in chat and we don't get to them today, as you know, as sign-ups for the session, at the end we will be sending out our brief survey, and we will try to answer any unanswered questions at that time if we have any remaining. So we're all set. Nannette has prepared a fantastic presentation for us, and so now, Nannette, I'm going to turn it over to you. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Nannette.
Thanks, Ann. Hello, everyone. I'm glad you've joined us today. I'd like to pick up our conversation today where we left it the week before Valentine's Day, when we were busy busting those myths that Ann talked about, and I wanted to remind us of Session 1's T-shirt, if you will. Because metadata is indeed a love note to the future, especially library metadata, which will sort of be our guiding principle for today. So as we move forward, if you attended Session 1, you know I like T-shirts. I'm all about the development T-shirt. And as we start to talk today, I've posed the question is, what's the T-shirt for today? As we begin active development in 2018, and we head into the year of MARC metadata transformation. And Some, or Facebook, might suggest the old favorite, keep calm and metadata on. And I admit, it must fit at least part of what I talk about a lot because Facebook keeps recommending it to me in my news stream. About once a week, I get a suggestion that I should purchase this T-shirt. But, as those of you who know me know, that recommendation by Facebook probably assures I won't use that T-shirt as my theme today. Even though I am a metadata geek, they're right. I don't like being predictable. And in fact, it really irritates me. And if you catch me on the wrong day, it concerns me that Facebook, Amazon, and Google know me so well. Well enough, in fact, that their recommendation matches this metadata geek and her concerns. And because it does, it sets off the iconoclast in me, assuring that I'll pick anything but this T-shirt for my T-shirt today. But then again, at a different moment, if I were pressed for time and in a rush to find something quickly that has actually a high PETA, if you will, if I don't find it, or a high risk of adverse consequences if I don't find a way to get this information into my day, like, say, purchasing a gift for a party that I have to attend tonight, or finding that book on Scrum that my boss said I need to read because it's the guidebook to our development processes, or to put it in library terms, maybe the resources that I need for that paper that I have to write late tonight for my class, a class I'm not too fond of, but that I have to take because it's a requirement for graduation. Well, then I love, and I do mean love in all caps, that these algorithms know me so well, and that they usually recommend the right thing at the right time with a pretty good degree of contextual awareness because it saves me so very much time on these things that I have to do. And I did say love, and I mean love, not in the I don't want to be alone on Valentine's Day date kind of way, but love it. Because in the economy of attention that the Facebooks, Googles, and Amazons are competing in, they're watching me close enough to know what I'm likely to request, almost before I request it. And more than that, they're watching me and making sure their suggestions come with potential context that I'm likely to ask these questions in. So Facebook says I should keep calm and metadata on. But even though I love these things and they slightly irritate me, I have a problem. The T-shirt I'm actually wearing in my library system today, it says keep calm and catalog on. I'm not sure cataloging on and metadating on are the same thing. Because I have to admit that the recommendations I just said I love, when I'm pressed for time, they only work for things that are on, in, and of the web. And library resources aren't really like these T-shirts, not yet anyway. If library resources appear in Facebook or Google's or Amazon's recommendations, they're usually there without enough context to get pulled into any of these cool time-saving first stop in my information-seeking journey. Algorithms, those recommendations that I love so much, at least not yet. And we learned the whys of this not yet in session 1's myth-busting. And here I ask you to remember those points I made about the description and access, how the description and access that we do from RDA are mismatches to Amazon's style of recommendations. And how our MARC is a mismatch sometimes to SEO optimization issues and where we want to appear in Google's results list. And remember, we talked a lot about the myths of our old friend and former love, MARC, which is causing a lot of our problems at the moment. Which brings me to the T-shirt that I really want to use today. Keep calm and metadata your assets. Or said another way for 2018, the year of MARC modernization kicks into high gear, and that's what I believe this year is. If we start doing what it takes to get recognized, by these recommendations engines and smart algorithms, we'll go a lot farther, a lot faster than we are today. And yes, as this T-shirt I just put up says, this might be a bit painful at times because we have to give up a bit. We really do need to thin down our bloated MARC records, and we're going to have to build a little muscle and provide it to those recommendation engines. But doing so, it's for no pain, no gain, right? But doing so, it allows us to gain a lot. So where do we start? As we'll see in part 1 today, I suggest we start with better MARC data today. Yep, I said it. Better MARC data today. so that the search engine optimization and some small parts of the knowledge context we've been hiding, or as we said last session, are trapped in our MARC notes all these years, and we present those few bits of valuable context with cleaned up MARC that only library metadata has to offer, and that those recommendation algorithms need to improve their relevance, especially when they're personalization. And we do it in ways through better MARC that Facebook's, Google's, and Amazon's engines recognize and can make use of, and in ways that have fewer of the quality problems that often cause our current MARC-based link data to get tossed onto the irrelevant pile before the engines ever see it. So even though we put it out there, many times it's not actually picked up because of the quality issues and moved in. And if we do this, if we fix these things today, in step one, we're getting our metadata, the metadata that leads our patrons back to the assets we have in our libraries for our constituents. If we're getting that through the recommenders' firewalls, those are Facebook, Google, Amazon, LinkedIn, and the like, and into their relevancing engine, where all of those eyeballs, the eyeballs of our library patrons, can see it in what folks are now calling the economy of attention. And if you've not had a chance yet to hear about that, I suggest you go to one of Catherine Harnish's presentations on the economy of attention at any of the upcoming conferences. She presented just last week, Midwinter was last week, or the week before, I guess it was over the weekend, on the economy of attention. These engines are competing will be on the web, and will be on the web in ways that people can see. So after we've cleaned up our MARC, what do we do next? Well, in part two today, we talk about once we do what we need to get recognized by today's recommenders in the economy of attention, we can start to move into our future by capitalizing on those valuable added insights, those few that we fed to them through our improved MARC-driven link data. And we can start to drive the web and the economy of attention. Sorry, I lost myself in my notes. We can start to drive the web of attention powers that be, Facebook, Google, Amazon, further into what we know to be our authoritative, internationally and historically connected library asset metadata. And hopefully in this process, we get their relevancing engines addicted to the level of valuable, available context only native library link data offers. And by doing that, we drive our patrons back into our discovery engines and other knowledge enablement tools that only library has to offer. And not just as a recall engine for a known title or ISBN that they discovered on Amazon, Facebook, or Google. And they discovered it so they could drive the delivery of free access of their web-addicted eyeballs to those resources they couldn't afford to purchase access to from the recommenders or didn't want to. Right? That's what we do today. But we want to drive them back into our tools as learning, research, literacy, and inquiry facilitation engines that drive impact and engagement, not just for the library, but for the students, faculty, adult learners, K-12 patrons, business people, children, parents, and resource-driven entertainment seekers that we in libraries serve. So at this point, in a second session about metadata, I want to pause because I think a slide aside is appropriate. An aside about what we metadata geeks, librarians, library technologists, and the like represent not just to the powers that be in library and on the web, but to the larger knowledge landscape. And I might have hit on catalogers a couple of slides ago, and I've certainly hit on MARC, but I want to flip that statement around. And if you do, you soon see that we metadata geeks, catalogers, librarians, and technologists sit at the heart of library and the library marketplace, past, present, and yes, future. The things we do, or we sit there mostly because the things that we do enable learning, research, literacy, and inquiry. In fact, we, as a group, represent the world's only trained, sustainable, funded, context and knowledge enablement metadata workforce in the knowledge economy. We don't think of ourselves that way very often, but think about what we do. If we weren't chasing errors in MARC, think about all those things we put in notes. Think about all that subject classification. Think about what these relevance engines and recommending engines of the knowledge economy and the economy of attention could do with it once we provide it to them. And yes, we may be changing or have changed how we do what we do, and we're certainly changing the formats that we do it in. And when we're really honest, we're changing where we do it from. Sometimes it's not inside the library. Sometimes it's at one of those recommenders as a librarian working there, or it's at a vendor, or it's at a supply house for our MARC records. But what we haven't changed is the what of what we do. It's been a constant, and it has been for many, many years. And as we learned in session 1 from my favorite cataloging historian, Karen Coyle, what we do, as she said, isn't and never has been about MARC. It's always been about access, enablement, and service. It's always been about library. So speaking of that, before we dive into the details, I do want to spend a couple slides talking about what we do and why we do it as individuals. Because, as the t-shirt says, geeks are people too. We are, after all, people, not just people, not just machines. And that's part of what makes what we do and how we do it so special and so valuable. When we're firing on all cylinders, this world's only trained set of knowledge enablement experts, what we're doing is adding human staff judgment to the metadata. And that changes the recommenders. That changes the engine. That adds value that only library adds. So as we dive into this a bit, I'll use myself as the guinea pig. And then after that, we'll take a few minutes in chat to let you talk to us about you and why you do metadata and what you think it offers. So as promised, here's a bit about me. And a few pictures that show me as I really am. Right? What I drive besides systems with metadata, and the people, too, part of me, the metadata geek. And in doing so, it shows you a few things that make me me. Me, part of the world's only trained, sustainable, funded, context, and knowledge enablement metadata workforce that Facebook recommends those t-shirts to. And these things are parts of what I'm sure you and Facebook and other facilitators now see in the work and the pictures and the thoughts that I present today and on the web. And today will be on the web as it's a recording, so they'll get to pick up some of these things too. This is concrete context about me. That those purchase recommendation engines that I keep talking about use to drive better personal relevancy calculations. It's metadata about me, if you will, that if exposed, and I like to say, if I decide to allow it to be exposed to those engines to access based on my need at the moment, which is pretty high in the case of PETA or adverse consequences, if I expose that, these things will help drive a better user experience for myself and not just shopping, but once our systems can do it, discovery engines and other knowledge enablement tools that I'm trying to drive those patrons back to from Google, Facebook, and Amazon. And in doing so, will likely result in greater impact and engagement, my greater impact and engagement with the tools, the content provided to me through those tools, and hopefully in my day-to-day work and personal life, digital or otherwise. So, a little bit about me and that metadata. What am I, or who am I? I'm a career-long metadata geek with a need for order. That last part, that need for order, boy, that tells you something that the relevancing engines would really like to see. I'm a library technologist with a sense-making bent and a need for simplicity. So it has to make sense. It can't be overly complicated. Oh, and I'm a library technologist. That's key. I'm not a librarian. I'm a library technologist. So I get a lot of more t-shirts about metadata geek than I get about improving my library career. And I'm a service-minded developer who loves to learn and needs to ask why. That shouldn't surprise anybody that knows me. The asking why probably won't surprise you after 2 sessions with me. But I do love to learn, so I'm going to buy a lot of books like that Scrum book that I talked about earlier, and I'm all about development. I'm not a maintainer, so they're going to keep sending me more things about software development. And finally, I'm a car enthusiast. I drive tractors, I drive convertibles, I drive classic cars, and I love wind in my hair, I need speed, and I crave variety. Oops, I think I jumped ahead before I got to the end of my notes. Nope, I didn't. So that's who I am. Let's chat a little bit about you. What content and metadata about you, if offered to any of these engines, inside or outside library, would help get you better personal relevancy calculations in not just shopping, but discovery engines and other enablement tools? And I do want to note that I don't mean to imply that those of us here today, metadata geeks and self-selected metadata interested library somethings, are by any means typical. In fact, we're not typical of our patrons. And I think too often, and for too long in the modernization journey, we've limited our designs and our work by imagining that we are typical and that we can extrapolate what we know about ourselves to understand our users and patrons better. That's not what I'm suggesting here today. Rather, I'm hoping to start a conversation that allows us to use ourselves as guinea pigs, if you will, in an object lesson that gets us thinking about user-centered design, a basic principle from session 1, that we'll use again today. In fact, I hope to not just get us thinking about it, but begin to feel what it feels like to be the object of study, that user studied, therein helping us develop some experience and context before we dive into the how-tos and before we head out of this session to do it on our own. Because as we go to query our users and study them and develop personas and start thinking about user-centered design for real, empathy and knowing our own personal biases as users before we start talking to anyone else are key. And it goes a long way in ensuring the success of our endeavors there. And we don't stop and talk about this very often, so I wanted to add this piece. So I'm going to ask these questions of you, and I ask that you chat your answers to Bill and Ann. What kind of career-long geek are you? And everybody in library is a geek of some kind. That's one of the things I love about it. It's why I've stayed here. And what does that career-long geek in you need? What kind of a library person are you? What are your bents? And what do you have needs for as that library person? Almost everyone in library is service-minded. You don't stay in teaching, nursing, or library if you're not. It's a service profession, and our goals and discipline tell us that. And we self-select for that. So as a service-minded professional of some kind that works in library and has a geek bent, what do you love and what do you need? And finally, who are you outside of this? As a person, what do you crave? What do you need? What do you love? And with that, Bill, I'll hope that folks are chatting something, and I will pass it to you.
Yes, I haven't seen any come in on this yet, but I have a couple questions from earlier. That came up from our initial questions. Barbara is asking, as a private institution not open to the public, how can I justify this Google and other search engine access when most of our resources aren't available outside of the institution?
I think what I'm suggesting today isn't about making them available to anyone. I mean, that's one of the criticisms I would have that I think I haven't stated on the slide about our current linked data. That's how we present it. And quite frankly, I have the same question. Who cares? I care in a library about serving my users. And the reason that I would justify it is your users are starting there. If your users are anything other than crusty old researchers, they don't have to be old, they can be young, that don't use phones and don't use laptops and don't use tablets, that don't talk to anyone outside their institution, they're on Google, they're on Facebook, they're on LinkedIn. They are starting their information-seeking journeys outside our library, outside our discovery systems. And that's what we want to be, where they are, right? It's today's version of the rule of embedding, right? Meet your users where they are.
Yeah. Another question, what exactly needs to be done to clean up our current MARC records in library systems?
That's part one. Other thoughts or questions?
I have an obsession with the presentation of records and indexing.
That, yes. I think that's the description of a cataloger.
Right.
And I think there's valuable skills there. I think the pain that we have, that some of the next slides suggest, or as we move forward, are that we have to take those skills and those loves and get them out of record-based MARC and out of the types of indexes that we use today, which are kind of discoordinated lists that we put together and hope drive something, right? They're sorts out of a database, and into, because those same skills work in what we're doing today, and those same values. In fact, they drive us to be very good at it. But as we'll talk about today, we're moving into objects instead of records as we come out of MARC, and they're very different, and that's natively the way these places that our users go first in their information-seeking journeys work, as we'll get into a little bit in part one. And their indexes are different. They're more like a back-of-the-book index, if we're familiar with those. I mean, catalogers are the world's best back-of-the-book indexers. When we stop and think about it and get ourselves out of MARC, we know so much about our disciplines, and I don't consider myself a cataloger, but I love to talk to catalogers, right? They know so much about the discipline that they catalog for. If they're generalists, they know so much about how people pull and seek information because you cultivated all those indexes. If we can put that in something better than MARC, in something more modern that works with the places our users' eyeballs are, that's the win. That's the unique value that library has to offer, and that's the unique value that we all, as that world's only sustainable, funded, been around for a very long time, knowledge enablement experts can bring. Which is probably a perfect segue into the next set, unless you have other questions, though.
There were just a few other comments that people added. Martin added, outside of work, I'm obsessed with music, philosophy, and beer. I'm mostly driven by parenting motivation. And that hits close to home. It's close to home to me, too.
I love all of those things. I'm an obsessed parent as well that's trying to get herself away from being obsessed because as Ann and Bill know, my child turned 18 today, so that means I get to be slightly less obsessed, I think. But, right, one of the things that we do, and one of the reasons those loves are important is, you know what catalogers do in our spare time? Or metadata geeks like me, because I thought I don't self-identify as a cataloger. We classify things. Beer, chocolate, cars. We bring order, right, to that world.
Right.
And music. I do want to say music and math. Music and math are high on the list of things that we offer to the world that really make sense against knowledge enablement, and hopefully you can pick that out as we move forward. Sorry, Bill.
No, go ahead. There's lots of good comments in here, so I'll get some of these out here. I'm more of a cataloger than a metadata diva, but I'm moving out of the MARC and crossing over to the information into metadata for digital collections. I'm an energy lover, Reiki master, and crave new events, new experiences, and adventures. 32 plus years with a need for full and transparent access. I consider my cataloging database as my firstborn child. We call it Stella. I'm a career-long ILS and library automation geek, and with a need to help libraries provide access to their collections, their services, their spaces. I am the person in the library who ensures optimal workflow, optimal data storage, optimal access to what we offer. This is how I'm service-oriented, serving staff and serving the public. And one more. I'm uber organized outside the office, serving as secretary, newsletter editor, and performing other organizational tasks. I'm a choral geek, too.
So what I love about this is it shows so much passion for what we do and what we have to offer. And what I want to say to you is bring this into especially part 2 as we go forward, and share this part of you with your users as you're working on user-centered design, because then they'll tell you what they like about what you have to offer, and that's the spot that we're really delivering service in libraries. And really, that's why most of us stay here. So I will, with that, move on and add another of those basic principles. So I had a little while that we dug into user-centered design. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the basic principle, another basic principle from last session. And I'm going to use myself as the guinea pig again, as the user-centered, starting with the knowns and providing a bit of historical context that is helpful to part 1 and 2 today. And I did say about myself, and some of you have some great things about yourself, and I don't think they differ very much, which is, you know, why geeks hang together, right? And about myself, that sense-making, question-asking, service-driven library technology geek who was fortunate enough, or the crazy masochist Sam would say, depending on how you look at it, I wanted to ask the history of metadata modernization, and I was that crazy person behind RDA for longer than probably is rational. Did this library cataloging rules and standard-driven process, a 15-year-long journey, to modernize the rules, does it simplify anything? And I'm adding now the pictures, right, of the people doing it. This 15-year-long journey to modernize the carrier, did it implement the lessons learned in round one where it modernized the rules? I mean, right, BibFrame's coming, guys. And as we iterated BibFrame's coming, does it escape our silo? Does it gain us any speed, save us any money, and accommodate the variety of things that we do? So basically I'm asking as a sense-making, service-driven, question-asking geek, did it increase the order of our catalogs or processes, especially against the front end of the life cycle, publishers, and all those things that get done before we can select and acquire content in libraries? Did it increase the order of our catalog or processes against the back of the life cycle, the patrons, resources, researchers, I can't talk today, end users, and those who access our content to create new content and loop that cycle back around? Did it simplify anything about our workflows in ways that gained us speed, accuracy, or savings? And I suppose by the end of the day, you're going to be really tired of hearing me say speed, accuracy, and savings, but that's what I think especially Better MARC is about. We better get those things out of it while we're in our current system. Did any of this process that these standard bodies listed on this page and others, did they learn from the process? Did they implement their lessons learned? And did they do so in ways that allowed us to escape our silo, make better decisions about when and how and where to spend our money in ways that best serve our patrons, institutions, and the needs and desires of those who fund us? Did it allow us to accommodate the increasing variety confronting our business? And yes, I said business because while we're a service organization, we're already a business, right? We spend money to collect things. We spend money to deliver things, and hopefully that delivers more patrons into our tools and services so that we can keep being funded. Did any of this allow us to do that with increased speed and accuracy? So the question that I'm asking then against all of these is what this t-shirt says. And I think that for me that was the issue as that type of geek behind the scenes, that we needed to follow the evidence because it would lead us out of our delusions. And quite frankly, there are any number of delusions that we went into that 15-year journey with, and many of them we've been disavowed over the process, and I want to talk about those a little bit today. And why? Because it helps us cast parts 1 and 2, right, in an evidence-based manner from outside the library silo, as I've talked about a lot today with the relevance and recommendation engines that our users start in, and from inside the library. And I'll do the inside the library part here in a timeline format on this 15-year journey. And why do I want to do this? So that we better understand how to realize value today in our current systems while we wait for release of the next-gen platforms and applications that are going to allow us to provide more value in our patron-facing applications, that are going to allow us new avenues of metadata enhancement and more flexibility in the ways we manage our resources, metadata, and the constituents we serve. And quite frankly, as we wait, once those systems are released and we decide we want them, for the budgets and staff that are needed to invest in these platforms and applications. So, to the timeline, following the instructions on this t-shirt here, let's follow the evidence and let's see what delusions it leads us out of. Metadata modernization, round 1. I think it started in 2006. That's really when it all started, as a simple little update of the cataloging rules to accommodate the digital resources that were increasingly dominating library collection budgets and circulation statuses. Unfortunately, though, Ferber got in the way. And we didn't, functional requirements for bibliographic records, right? Wow, was it Ferber? No, it was WMI. And WMI slowed us up quite a bit. Unfortunately, though, in hindsight, 15 years later, while we paused to address the conflict of the rules update of AACR3 with WEMI, we failed to address two key things that would have taken us farther faster. The first of those being the concerns about the cost of implementing WEMI. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I want to talk about them for a minute, the concerns that were expressed about the cost of implementing WEMI at the time. At the time, many thought they sounded like the complaints of laggards who just didn't want to move forward. In fact, I think many said that. But I also want to point out 15 years later, these concerns have been proven true by the evidence. WEMI is indeed too expensive in terms of cost, and when implemented explicitly, as projects like the XD catalog and many others sent, and those inside vendors that you probably never see released, when WEMI is implemented explicitly, the processing speed, and even more so when it's parsed to MARC, the processing speed cost is very high. So the cost of cataloging, the cost of processing it, the cost of parsing it to MARC. A 1967 carrier for what was a 1990s conceptual model behind AACR3 and RDA as we see on this page. And that conceptual model, an old carrier, a conceptual model from the 90s that failed to address adequately the other thing that we missed in this pause, the native formats, the carrier types, the extent, the digital licensing, all of those other pieces in the life cycle before and after us that we talked about. The native formats that are associated with content creators, providers, and owners, also known as publishers, aggregators, academic institutions, the government, and other content and intellectual property owners. All those people who sell, resell, distribute, and deliver digital and electronic content to the marketplace, right? All of those people that those recommender engines that we talked about at the beginning and those relevancing engines are depending on right now. It also failed to address, right, the native formats of things we do in libraries that purchase, license, and provide access to digital content. I mean, we may be talking about doing it our own way, but if we want to do it with speed and accuracy, we get into a little problem. And it failed to address the library patrons and potential patrons who seek and acquire knowledge and information. Increasingly, in 2006, this was over the internet and through learning management systems such as distance education, which is what online education was morphing to at the time, and the digital publishing revolution itself. You know, the thing all those creators and owners and distributors were doing that started in the 90s, or that started in the 80s, but was maturing into the 90s in a whole new way of doing business in the content business. We missed that. We shouldn't have. Lesson learned, right? Skip ahead then to 2010 and the official release and adoption of RDA, or, as I suggest here, the WEMification of the cataloging rules. So WEMI missed things, and now we're WEMifying our rules with an implied conceptual model that, by the way, didn't have a logical or physical model. Well, that's part of the native mismatch too, right? There's your data. There's the thing we go to school to learn, whether we're an MLIF or a metadata geek, right? Conceptual, logical, physical model. That's what we missed here. I'm saying that because that's important in moving forward. So despite massive changes in the knowledge lifecycle, and libraries for that matter, since the inception of Ferber in the 90s, and let's remember that the final report from Ferber was published in 1998. Massive changes in how the resources libraries purchase, license, and provide access to are created, sold, distributed, sought, found, and accessed. Library metadata modernization moved doggedly forward with a revision of the rules, all the while dragging MARC behind it as not just the carrier of choice, but in all practicality, the only carrier of what we were doing. So what did we learn? I think the problem statements here and summarize the lessons we learned, at least to me, a sense-making, question-asking, service-driven library technology geek. As pointed out, and I pointed some of these out in last week's myth debunking, but I think they bear repeat, and let's hope my slides work. Okay. And then I don't click too many times. So one of the things is resources, as we know, more than ever today, are much larger than books. And a mental model, and the models by which we create Better MARC today, and native library linked data tomorrow. So Better MARC today, native linked data tomorrow. The lesson learned is it's a lot more than a book. And it needs to be clearly articulated clearly articulated, in conceptual, logical, and physical models with definitions that allow us to do it with speed and accuracy. And we need to remember those records don't actually represent natively the content objects that are distributed in the knowledge lifecycle today, especially records that don't contain persistent identifiers. So the better MARC we want to create today as we move toward tomorrow's native library linked data must address this problem. If our better MARC is going to feed those things I kept mentioning, the Facebook, Google, Amazon, and because there will be more, recommendation and referencing engines that are going to allow us any hope of understanding how using them as a way in drives traffic into our library. And not just into our library, but into its resources, services, and tools. Right, so there's my persistent identifiers. And finally, the cost of staying in this silo, doing things our way first and then hoping to connect them out to the larger native world outside our walls, be those walls brick and mortar or digital, is higher than the naysayers of AACR3 moving to RDA and the pragmatists of the report on the future of bibliographic control ever suggested. I mean, the evidence shows us that, right? It's very expensive, and some of us are experiencing it today, and that's why we need better MARC. And I do want to take a moment to point out here that if you want more on this history, that future of bibliographic control, that report, it has some things in it that are still quite relevant. And one of the writers there was my favorite cataloging historian, Karen Coyle. She was key on the team, as was a very large public library using native EIN data and Excel spreadsheets from their distributor at the moment of selection before those books arrived in the library to cataloging incoming acquisitions and provide access to them on reserve before they got to the library in the native languages of their end users, which were something like 35 at the time, not just English, but Thai romance novels. So I guess what I want to point out is if you're going to go back and look at this stuff, as the evidence proves it true, who to listen to and where to look. I also want to emphasize, because I hope we have public libraries on board. Public libraries knew this early. There's a path to follow as we move forward to take the right lessons learned forward. Let's see, is my slide changing? So before we go to round two, Bill, I'll just pause and see if you have any questions about round one.
No questions so far. It was just a comment from Martin. I think when you were in the beginning, you were talking about some metadata modernization, and he was just generally commented that, no, it makes things more complicated and clutters the display. Talking about Ferber and Wenny, I believe.
Absolutely. And that is what drove this person that loves simplicity to go find the evidence and to see what it was doing. So let's jump ahead then to 2012 and the beginning of BibFrame. Yeah, this is 6 years after the stuff on the previous slide of trash talking and not a small amount of evidence later about what was wrong with the cataloging rules changes. 6 years later, library takes its first step out of the silo towards native, or so it appears at the time. But, again, we get slowed down. Right? We run into funding difficulties. We run into training overhead, staff capabilities, and the aged infrastructures internally at the library. We ran into this in 2012. Does this sound, hopefully, with BibFrame 1.0, hopefully this sounds familiar to all of you. I think we're still here 8 years later. The good news, though, that is in the interim, as we plan and work to address these things that will take us to a larger, more stable future, we did learn some things here. And we learned to experiment for real in collaborative ways, collecting good evidence, which is definitely what you're going to see in parts 1 and 2. So moving this lesson learned forward. Sorry, probably made you all seasick. We also learned here, back in 2012, to peer review our work outside the library silo against larger, broader standards that are used more natively by those in the library, in the knowledge life cycle before us and after us. And we started introducing that to BibFrame 1.0. In fact, that's why we got to BibFrame 2.0 so quickly. And we moved from experiments in this process as we moved out of 2012 and forward. We moved from experience to grounded evidence-based development processes and initial releases, including the extension of BibFrame 2.0. So the first one that's really implementable is the one we're dealing with now that's moving forward incrementally, BibFrame 2. And I want to point out that it was a very small, right? BibFrame 1.0 is large. BibFrame 2.0, if you look at the model, is small. But it's right, and it's collaborative, and it's our launching pad out of MARC that accommodates the diversity of resources, business cases, and constituencies that we address. And the reason it's small is because of those first points, peer review and an evidence way of moving forward. And it's live development, not an experiment. And it's this live development, these developments, that lead us to 2018, the year of MARC metadata transformation. In fact, it's the very thing enabling it. But, and we'll look at the bottom of this slide, 2016 brought us to IFLA's FR consolidation and the LRM, the library reference model. Honestly, just somebody's going to ask, and I have been asked, I've been thinking about this a lot. I think the library reference model is a good thing. I think that it helps. And why do I think this? I'd suggest that you check out the methodology section of the published LRM. If you look up IFLA LRM online, you'll get straight to it. That methodology section, they're really onto something, and they explain it to us better than any of the previous things on these slides. They're talking about objects, and they're talking about nativeness. And they're addressing the problem of how to handle all the varied legacy systems we sit in today, and with that, all of the varied variants and types of MARC we have in each of those systems today, because MARC's not a stable thing, right? And it's not a single thing. It's many things in different systems, as we all know. There's a bunch of its costs. Right? That's what I think that they're doing in this consolidation effort. So I suggest you check out that methodology section if you want to learn a bit more about how they've thrown evidence at it. And IFLA did throw evidence at it. They threw Ferberoo and object evidence from the U.S., Canada, and Europe against it to learn how to address it better. And to learn how to do all of this in a way that doesn't keep corrupting our metadata, which is something new too. As we move it around and pass it around, we're kind of corrupting that MARC as we move it from system to system. We're not sharing it so much as we are modifying it for our specific need at a specific time in a specific system. The models of now would call that corruption. We're not versioning it, we're changing it. But I'll be honest, all of this requires more study and more evidence in live metadata systems, which is exactly what we're starting to do today, at least here at Innovative. And I'll remind you that IFLA's official adoption of the LRM that I'm sending to you occurred just in the last half of last year. And I would ask you to check back with us, or with me if you like, in about 6 months, because we'll have a lot more evidence to say, hey, was this just a good thing, and does it take us farther, and how? For now, then, I want to move on and end the walk through the history of BibFrame 2.0 and LD4P, which I'll talk about throughout today, which, if you haven't, check it out. There's live library use cases using BibFrame 2.0 today to do real things inside and outside our systems. And a quick search of LD4P will pop it up and its workspace up as the top thing in Google. And if you go there a lot like I do, Facebook will even start recommending it to you. So I don't want to leave this without pausing for a moment to talk about the RDA rework, the revamp of those rules we talked about in the first page, whose initial approach was so problematic to our modernization efforts, and the 3R project that the governing bodies in the ALA are working on now, that's due to hit us sometime late this year. Right in the middle of the year that we're transforming our MARC data. And I think it's supposed to hit us in several coordinated phases, as I read on their website today. And you can, again, search the 3R project. It'll take you straight to the RDA toolkit section and their official announcements of what they're doing. And I think, as I understand it, and this isn't on the pages, but this is what I think they're trying to do with it. I think they're trying to fix the problems and the lessons learned of the previous 2 pages. by making sure that they explicitly state the conceptual model that's underlying the rules is the LRM, right, that piece that was just adopted. So they're adjusting the rules to what they consider the underlying conceptual model. So they're fixing the rules themselves then, and they're using BibFrame, the non-MARC encoding standard through which we encode and release our metadata. So in theory, they're putting the parts back together. Honestly, I'm just going to say right here, I don't know, right, how good it will be. I don't know how well it will work. But what I do know is that time and testing will provide us with the evidence we need to understand that. And again, we're working on that right now here at Innovative in our next generation metadata development. These are the things that we're basing it on. These are the things that Better MARC today and native linked data tomorrow are based on. And as I said a bit earlier, please feel free to check back with us again closer to year's end, and we should have a lot to share with you. For now, I'll simply pass along the early thoughts from this sense-making question-asking service-driven library technology geek that I have about it. And I'll ask you, the self-selected metadata interested library something that you gave us bunches of beautiful comments about who you are a little bit earlier. I'll ask you, and I'll ask you to chat your thoughts about this and the things you hope we address, and I'll throw out a couple of mine for comment to get you started. I do wonder if all of this is too little too late. Do these changes take us farther, faster together, or do they simply slow us down again as WEMI did in the beginning? I don't know, but those are some of the questions we are subjecting in our active development to evidence and live data. And I wonder, is all of this worth the added expense, staff training, policy statement and documentation rework, and all of the other pieces that will come with renumbering and reorganization of the rules? That's going to cost us a lot. Vendors, it's going to cost, which will end up costing individual libraries. It's going to cost individual libraries. Do we get enough out of it? Does it give us enough bang for our opportunity cost buck, or would we rather invest our training and upgrade costs elsewhere to more direct drivers of patron engagement in library, learning, inquiry, and research, and their impacts? I don't know. These are the questions that we're suggesting evidence to. And I also ask, must we, as with past cataloging rule changes, all make the same adoption choice? Or are we free enough? Are the rules flexible enough today, as they should be, to allow each institution to make the choice or choices that best fit their needs at the moment in the system they're in? And I'll say again, honestly, I don't know. I can only say that these are the questions that we're asking here today at Innovative in my day-to-day job. And we're putting or subjecting all of this to evidence-based agile development processes as we work on our next generation metadata and discovery product development, which is key. Metadata with the discovery, one's an interface on the other, right? That's evidence at the moment. Because if it doesn't help people find the things we have in ways that they can find them and it doesn't feed those recommender engines I keep talking about, was it worth doing? I don't know, but it's the way that we're building this into our processes, and I think it takes us a long ways, and none of this that we've talked about in rounds 1, 2, or 3 was done that way. So I want to ask you, what do you think? What are you worried about? What do you want us to test? And if you haven't already started, please chat your answers to Bill and Ann. And if you don't have anything to chat today, send us notes as you do. And with that, Bill, I'll ask.
Not seeing anything come through yet. Yeah, nothing right now.
All right. So I'll go on to a last question about all of this stuff that I've thrown out. Oh, yes.
Yep, I'm sorry. I was talking while muted here. But Martin did send a chat directly to the host where he said that he thought that perhaps we should probably have gone straight from AACR2 to a more RDF-compatible approach, where there was more fundamentally compatible, because they were more, I'm sorry, they're muffling his response, because they were probably more fundamentally compatible than either to the RDA approach that was undertaken. And then we also had a late chat that came in that said each of those major changes causes major or huge disruption to staff, and it became harder to sell to administration. So those were some things that came in. And then we actually have a question here from Patty, who wants to know, she writes, isn't the current system status quo unsustainable and therefore not an option? Excellent question, Patty.
It's an excellent question, and I definitely think it's unsustainable, which is why I think we need better MARC today, and we need native linked data. The evidence shows me that indeed, as we move to native linked data, that RDF question is well taken, and that's why I chose to share Karen Coyle's presentation with you from the Semantic Web Conference in 2015 in session 1. Because what you talked about is the systems that we have today MARC parsed into relational databases, and that logic that underlies Ferber, Wemme, and what we've been talking about so far today, that wasn't a one-to-one match to the catalog. It wasn't doing what we were trying to do with our catalogs, which was knowledge enablement. So I think there's really something to be said for the suggestion that what if we had jumped straight. I would modify it slightly and say with enough evidence now, is RDS the only solution? I don't think so, and I want to be clear, I don't mean just RDF when I say native linked data. What I mean is content and metadata that are integrated against the same standards and interlinked across versions, across forms and formats, in a way that the systems of today and the algorithms of today can read. RDF is part of that, but it's not all of it, which is, I guess, the blessing of the fact that we didn't do it back then, because there's been a lot more development and the algorithms and engines have moved forward. So as you look at what's the blessing of being in the moment we stand in history today, it's easier to move forward in an evidence-based manner with the small startup BibFrame 2.0, knowing what we need to do to increase speed and accuracy in our MARC systems, and knowing how algorithms like Facebook suggestion, somebody has paid for all the research, essentially, and we know that it's got verbal and other ways of delivering it than the keyboard. So, right, double-edged sword. Other thoughts and comments before I move into part 1?
No, just that Patty came back and she said she agreed.
Good. I'm happy that we're getting so much conversation, and I hope that it doesn't end here. This is what, as your library partner, I mean, Bill and Ann can chime in. I think these are the conversations we're supposed to have with you, and I hope that we're starting to do a better job of that. What I know is that we sure are focused on it internally to do just that. All right, I'll jump ahead. So part 1, getting started with metadata modernization. This is the T-shirt that I wish Google recommended and Facebook recommended to me, because what I think getting started with it for real means is to keep calm and continue cataloging. I want to start by saying, for the record, the evidence that I believe necessitates such an approach is it's where we stand today. So, and I want to go back to our principles, right? Start with the knowns. These were at the end. So where we stand today is kind of like that kid's horse motif I used. But this time, for the experimentation and what it can teach us, right? The what we've done part, where we've been for 15 years, because we're beyond ready. Like this little guy, we don't want to ride a beginner's horse. We're beyond ready for the intermediate horse, right? We want to go farther, faster, with some real speed and precision. So we need to address and acknowledge, again, the evidence that's from our current MARC-based ILSs, from our MARC record exchanges and metadata collaboratives, from our MARC authorities, and the MARC policies and unified workflows we use today. I mean, that list could go on, right? Everything's MARC-based. MARC is fully integrated and ingrained into the business of library today. This is the piece I think all of that forgot. That we just went through. MARC is what we do. It does run our systems, and we can't just jump off of it onto something else. We know that we've well reached the limits of its extensibility. And we know, like, right, this kid's horse that's now out to pasture, and this is one of mine that I pay to feed despite the fact that the kid's 18 and, you know, is well beyond an intermediate horse, right? We've reached that point where we're coming to diminishing returns, and our costs of ownership are escalating greatly. So we have a time frame by which we got to get to step 2, and with some urgency that we didn't have before. So it is time for MARC to be put out to pasture, and because we have this pressure in this time frame, 2018 has to be the year that we start to do that. Because the longer we keep it going, and the more we put off doing this, the slower our systems get. The more expensive it gets for us to do this, and the harder it becomes to find not just eyeballs who are willing to participate in what we're doing, right? Those people that are on the web and all those other places, our patrons. It becomes harder to find people who can help us keep it going, no matter what we're willing to pay if we have the money. Because as we're looking at the evidence, let's be honest. The folks that know how to do this, that have done it all this time, aren't just retiring out. Many, many of them already have. I don't know about you, but, you know, I wrote a blog about this last year. Most of my mentors are gone. They have retired out. And there aren't enough who are still here or enough new that want to go into training. I mean, and really, would any of us, as a new grad just starting our career, would we invest all of our training in MARC? Would we think that would improve our job prospects inside an outside library? Would we do that in a standard that for many of these people who would come in was born before they were? I'm 51, I think, almost 51. I'm the same age as MARC, right? They're not going to do that to fill that gap. And in the last year, in 2017, we saw evidence of that. If you watch the job postings, more and more traditional jobs in MARC are going unfilled. And not because we're not graduating new MLISs, right? And more institutions are changing the way they do metadata, right? They're taking the plunge and doing a total revamp or reinvestment in their metadata department. Maybe there's some of you on the line that are doing this. I know while I was in services, I talked to many of you who were doing this because you knew it was time to invest, and now you were held back not just by MARC, but by your development, by your vendor partners, which we're fixing. So where do we begin then, seeing that we're apparently trapped in the paradox of non-backwards compatibility and some standards that need improvement, and the realities of how long it takes and how much it costs to replace an entire infrastructure from the ground up, which is what we're really talking about doing industry-wide. It's easy to get impatient, but it's important to be realistic. What we're really talking about is industry-wide, replacing an entire infrastructure from the ground up that we've been using and refining since the late 60s. So we know we have to do it, but we have to ask, right, as those people we talked about and defined ourselves earlier, isn't there a way to do it at least partially to make this revolutionary change we're talking about with native linked data at least partially evolutionary? Or please, for our budgets, incremental. And to answer that question, I want to suggest that the simplest, most expedient way to begin is to change our perspective. We know MARC and cataloging rules are not the future. Heck, we just spent 35 minutes talking about why. And if we've learned nothing from that 15-year journey or the past 30 to 40 minutes, I hope we learned this, that we need to think about a simpler, more expedient way to do this. We need to change our perspective. And I hope we learned that the problems of the last slide are due to MARC's non-native match to the ways in which content creators, providers, and owners, also known as publishers, aggregators, academic institutions, the government, and other content and intellectual property owners, those people, right, MARC does non-native match to the way they create, sell, resell, distribute, and deliver content to the marketplace. They're a non-native match to what the content that libraries purchase, license, and provide access to for their patrons. And they're a non-native match to the patrons and potential patrons, the ways they seek and acquire information of knowledge, which is through search engines and digital marketplaces. It's in the virtual classroom and through the learning management system, and it's via connected applications and marketplaces like Amazon, LinkedIn, Tinder, Instagram, and the like. And I want to pause for a moment there because I added some new ones to the list, but I want to challenge you. Think about where, as you move to user-centered design and you start with the knowns, think about where your patrons and potential patrons are. Yeah, I'm over 50. I'm on Facebook. My 18-year-old is on Snapchat, Instagram, and Tinder. And those apps, oh, I hope he's not on Tinder, quite frankly, but he might be. And certainly my four-year college undergrads are. They're learning behaviors. They're doing things there that we have to deal with. And it's easy to toss that aside, but if you look at those new MLIS grads and PhD candidates that we are not attracting into their traditional jobs, this is what they're studying today. Go look it up. Go read some of that. It's certainly what I'm reading, and it's teaching me a lot. Before I looked at their evidence-based assessments of Tinder and how it connects to Instagram and how that's fully integrated, I didn't know that probably one of the most important things I needed to provide in an interface for discovery, swipe left. Swipe left because I haven't dated since I was 19, right? Swipe left to this generation means no thank you. It's a Boolean not. It's don't look at it again. That's important in user-centered design, and it should be one of our notes. So if we're doing this, if we're looking at it this way, if we're making the problem smaller, that means we're now free to apply a second principle, this principle of defining our box, a bit differently than we did in all of the past attempts I'm spending so much time talking about. And I want to suggest to you that the solution is that we define our box as a speed and accuracy-driven off-body restoration of MARC as it stands today. I did say I love cars, right? I love horses, I love cars. What can I say? I guess I'm all about speed at some level. But what does that mean? What does an off-body restoration mean? What does redefining our box a little bit about modernization mean so we can do better MARC? It's thinking about how we want it to work to get us out of our rather short-term pickle using all of our systems until something better comes around and I have the budget and staff to do it. Rather than the way we've been thinking about MARC in the past. This time we don't have to worry about how MARC should be applied, the theories and concepts and all the models behind it. And we can turn off our little, which all of us, most of us anyway, right, detail-oriented folks that need order and simplicity do, which is, right, there's the rules and then there's the should. But so-and-so taught me that MARC was supposed to be this way, and this means clean MARC, right, that whispers in her head. We can turn all of those things off if we redefine our box and make it simpler, and we can focus on just the things that increase speed and accuracy for the time that we're here, right, because we're doing an off-body restoration, right? And we can look at MARC then, or we can set it in our minds that it's just a dialect or many dialects with many variants that systems speak, that our legacy systems speak. Because isn't that what we're saying? If we're trapped in this paradox and need to get out of it, we need to move our thinking for any of the systems that we're sitting in and think about them as legacy systems. Then we can start applying all those lessons from outside our space in the life cycle. So taken from a user and current use focused design, we end up with a much, much, much smaller box of requirements than our previous attempts. And continuing the off-body restoration theme, I've moved from horses now to vehicles, which is, right, sort of an important switch in MARC. Many talked about it as a horse and buggy. Well, we're not talking about it as a horse and buggy in better MARC. We're talking about driving a car, a daily driver. And as such, we're not altering or souping up a daily driver that was built many years ago, like these pickups in 1967. But we're not altering or souping up the vehicle itself. We're not changing MARC. We're just restoring performance in our existent chassis with more performant MARC. Where more performant isn't as originally manufactured, but as currently implemented. Our systems, after all those systems we've been talking about that I keep throwing out, our daily drivers have had a lot of repairs, both good and bad, some of which are homegrown, some of which are aftermarket additions, many of which are the fixes that are made locally. And what I want to suggest with this slide is all of that is user and use-focused design. We need to know those things because that's what they are for real. And we're talking about an evidence basis. We're looking at MARC today, as it's implemented, as it's running, by the people that run it today, not the people that created it, by its owners today, and we want to optimize it against those needs and the needs of today's users that I've spent some time talking about today and where they are, like on Tinder, and those users in our legacy systems. And I just want to highlight, let's remember, today's users are not the users our systems were designed for. Making that system run faster and with more accuracy for them doesn't make making it running the way it was originally intended. Let's look at just one application in them, for example, our discovery systems. They were designed as the first stop on a user's information-seeking journey, but they aren't. At the risk of repeating myself one too many times, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, other social applications, other search engines, LMSs and digital classrooms, phones, tablets, applications on those things are our patrons' first stop. They only come to our discovery systems as they stand today once they know enough detail about the known item they want to get at lower cost and find it in our catalog so they can check it out and access it. Looking at user-focused design, applying the evidence, this is what they're doing in our systems today. Better MARC? The bar is this. And that's a lot lower and more achievable, thankfully, than fixing all of MARC. Heck, we spent 15 years on it and didn't do it, right? So what do we have to do that? We have to have the identifiers in our systems that our users look for. Identifiers are their finding aids. And we need to use the finding aids that they need in our system to gain access, that the finding aids, recommendation engines, the first stop, those things of choice for our end users, provide them. That's the criteria for known item search working faster and with more accuracy for them in our discovery systems and catalogs today. Right? What else is getting in their way? What else does better MARC mean? It means deduping the set of records that they're looking for with these identifiers, because dupes get in the way. My favorite one is addition, right? I come in with an identifier. Maybe that identifier is a label. It's a title. I want this edition of this textbook for my serious adverse consequences if you don't get it today, Nannette, because you're going to have to talk to your professor about it tomorrow, maybe take a quiz. And when I search in my discovery system today, I get everything from the first edition to the 5th edition, and I probably have to scroll sometimes unless someone's already corrected their local MARC and forced it to the top, right? It's worse if I have lots of dupes in my system. But this is what user-centered design, this is what MARC, better MARC today means. And once it's better in our systems, it'll be better as we push it out for all that search engine optimization and recommendation, because they use those identifiers too. A match to the identifiers they use, that'll get us out of the heap of not looking for it. Not sending dupes or not looking like we're sending dupes because we all send it out to them in a different way from a different library, that'll help too. We can leave everything else then to the cool next generation applications that we know we're going to have. We don't have to deal with it in our better MARC today. We have to deal with the things our users need in our systems today. If we do this and we separate this, because we're working, in truth be told, we're working on both steps simultaneously, right? Today and tomorrow, and we'll get to tomorrow in step 2. But if we do it and we separate it, we quit spending all of our precious money on today. That's stopping us from never getting to tomorrow. We can do what we need to do today, better MARC for these things that we know from our users in our existing systems, and put the other money into tomorrow, which isn't about better MARC. And this is just one example of how we can do this. When we redefine our box to a smaller set of things, user and user-focused approach gets us to. And I'll pause here because I've said a lot on not very many slides and see if folks have other thoughts or questions and if I'm starting to answer the questions that were posed.
Katie asked, are there articles or other resources we can look for the evidence-based studies that you are talking about?
Yes, I've been trying to throw them out as we go for what to search on. My favorite place to start is LD for P, which is just all caps. Also, it's a common request, and I'm going to have to do it at some place, so I'll let Ann and Bill put me on the hook for this, that sometime over the next couple of months, I make sure that I get you a full bibliography. My target for that was making sure I had it by IUG, but that's a very fair question. Again, I start with LD for P. I also follow BibFrame 2.0 and Kirk-Hess. And as I'll show you later, I follow Saeed Judri and his set. So as we go through all of these, I'm trying to direct you that way. I know that you need simpler pieces, and the best I can do on that is we're working on it, and please come back and ask me in a few months if you don't see that.
Nannette, this is Ann, and that's just great because I see a blog post coming in the near future from you, huh? Can we put you that far on the spot?
We can certainly, yeah, you probably can.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, we'll look for the bibliography, and we do keep our list of your attendance and registration for these sessions. So as soon as we get it, we will forward it to you.
I'm pausing because I'm actually making a note to make sure that gets into my to-do list, Ann.
Okay, good. I did too. Great minds think alike.
Yeah. Other questions before we go into the detail?
There's none on my end.
Okay, so I then take us to the next principle, right? I'm just, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just had one came in from Eva. So by deduping, are you also talking about the Ferber idea of selecting whether you want to listen to it, watch it, read it, etc.?
That's a great question. And yes, I am, but not in a Ferber way. And I'm not sure yet how much of that we can do in Better MARC and how much of that has to be in step 2, the native solution, but that's actually right where, it's why I'm pausing on when can I get the blog. That's actually the evidence we're working with in our system development today with Live MARC and Live BibFrame. What I don't know is where that breakdown's going to come, but what I can promise you is that breakdown will come, and it'll be something that we talk about as part of our next gen releases. I just want to make sure I have all the evidence in place to talk to you about it with certainty. Fair?
And Ava says yes.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to jump right into Principle 4 then. And I've taken the liberty of outlining from our discussions of the minutes last week and my study of the evidence over the past 4 years since I left the RDA initiative, what I think those things are about our current state that we can address with Better MARC and our smaller box and our user-focused approach. To allow us to keep calm and cataloging on, if you will, while we wait for the release of the next-gen platform. Which are going to focus on value and patron-facing applications, avenues of metadata enhancement, and flexibility in the way we manage our resources, metadata, and constituencies. So in that statement, I said those are the 3 things that I know we're doing in NextGen that we can't do in Better MARC. Maybe not all good news, but if we follow the evidence, that's right where things stand, because we are at the limit of MARC's extensibility. I've got a chat box in my way. So, right, we have to address duplicates. We have to address as much of the persistent identifiers in MARC as we can at the record level, at the phrase level, and by version or language. And I keep saying as much as what we can. We can have record level identifiers, We need to have them with a bigger degree of accuracy than they exist in any of our systems today. And by any of our systems, I am not speaking about only innovative. If you watch record numbers move around through systems about the same resource, you'll see that those numbers aren't as persistent as we think they are. So that's where some of the evidence is. We need to make them as persistent as we can. And we see changes coming out of PCC and I can't remember what they call the MARC replacement that are helping us do that and giving us spots to store it in a standard way, such as in the bib record, the URIs, and subfield 0. We need to also address the form and format divergence, which I think goes to Eva's question, right? A recording versus a performance versus a book, printed book versus an audio. We need to do that better in our better MARC. The question I have now isn't what we need to do, but how much we can do with accuracy that increases speed, and that'll be the limiter on how much we recommend and how much our systems help you do. We need to deal with the fact that our record supply is cumbersome and inadequate to today's needs and very expensive, and we're actively working on this right now. One of the things that is of importance to me is that we actually have already moved to upgrading records. In our existing systems, we bring in a stub as we license it. We might throw it out as we optimize our license. We'd like to be able to pick up any added detail that others who didn't stub that record or collected that resource permanently have as we move it back in our collection, managing our resource. So I've just stated the use case that we're looking at how to make our current record supply less cumbersome and to meet that need, because it's a known need that we do have to address. In providing electronic access to our systems. And the good news is I think we're finding some really good ways to do that, and we'll have more soon. And then we just want to acknowledge, right, that all of this is contributing to the loss of speed and performance in our current systems, which is seriously now more than ever damaging the quality user experiences our users have there. And a slide or so ago, I went through the use case of what's a better experience for them right now, and then also in all of that, we stand to lose user attention and attentiveness. So I look at these, we can make MARC as better as we can to address these things, but those things and that better also give us a number for how fast we have to replace our systems as we look to move forward in an evidence-based manner, which is why we detail our current state. And how much we're losing in all of that is important, and we are in the process of quantifying it, and I think it's different for different implementations. Thoughts or questions on this? I'm going to give you a chance to say if you have any brokens you think I've missed that are adversely impacting performance or experience at your library in your legacy systems.
Barbara commented that the MARC replacement equals MAC, I think.
Oh, she's right. It's MAC. Thank you. So if we don't have any, please share these with us. This is actually the question. How do I contribute? Where do I contribute? What do you want us to bring to you, product managers, that makes a difference to what you deliver for us? This is my question. Take it, share it, communicate with us about it. So then we're going to take the principle of giving shape to our dreams, right? Principle 5. It's hard to proceed in an evidence-based manner against a smaller box if we don't know concretely what we wish to achieve. I suggest that from what we've outlined here today, and borrowing we want to drive our classics a bit faster metaphor, that the desired outcomes are simple. We want to get to a fairly reliable daily driver without too much or excessive customization of the classic. I love this picture. It seems to me to be excessively customized, right? We don't want to do that. And we do many times, or right, many of the things that we think about doing might be that. We don't want to interrupt our current workflows or the native processes of the knowledge lifecycle that our classics don't adhere to, right? So there's two things we don't want to interrupt, which I chose to, right? We don't want to be under the hood tinkering with things that we shouldn't tinker with that interrupt things. and we don't want to incur too much expense in the process, either outlay or fines for doing it wrong. And as we've alluded to several times, it'd also be nice, applying this principle of sketching our outcomes, to talk about things like, right, these two pigeons talk about here. We want to avoid training, down training, some would say, of our new hires and our public-facing staff into our old systems and our old workflows, because that interrupts their productivity and the productivity that we hired them to do. I remember the moment that all of these people that are public-facing or new quit attending RDA sessions. They quit attending because of this. Let's not do that again. And with this said, I want to talk about all those Library of Congress pilots, as well as the cooperative cataloging vendor pilots that are going on right now. They're starting to make a lot more sense, right? Because if you look at them knowing this is what they're trying to do, go back and look at Library of Congress's pilot information. They're releasing a lot right now. And I think they just released all the presentations they put on stage a week or so ago about their pilots. That's what they're trying to do there. So put this hat on when you look at it to sketch your actions. And honestly, I'm very excited we're doing this because these are the lessons learned in the national test. I was behind the curtain for that. I got to hear a lot of things, if not act on them. And I'm very excited that the leadership of Library of Congress is applying those things they learned from that test that they did or didn't do well into these pilots, and it's worth our time to listen. So that's another thing I read. Someone asked that. So how do we start to do it? I think we start small with the things like the persistent identifiers, right? For the things our users want most under the identifiers they look for. With persistent connections between the MARC record that we use to drive our experience and performance in current systems, as well as persistent connections to the historical, authoritative, and valuable content that we're putting into our next generation solutions. What are these things? They're ISBNs, ISNIs, ISSNs, DOIs, ORCIDs, ISRCs, and ISWCs if we're talking about non-book material. They're ISAMs, again, not book materials, and they're EIDRs if we're talking EIDRS. If you want to know more about these things, I would really suggest that you take our Metadata Bootcamp class. It goes into all of these identifiers in detail in a way that's very helpful if we're going to start small and fix our users' biggest problems first. They're also name tags, right? They're titles, as they're distributed on the resources that our patrons are requesting most, and as they're seeing them in all of those recommender engines. And in this case, I want to say RDA was right? Take what you get, or as we'd say in computer language, right, WYSIWYG. Those titles, making those titles, the titles under which our users look for them, that's helpful. And then relationships between all of these things, right? Again, RDA is helpful. Took us beyond relator terms, gave us ways to do this. Those are valuable now when you look at what we're doing in our systems and how we need to optimize them in this process, and they're helpful in the future. So it's places that it's worthwhile to spend our money. And then, as I already said, changes coming out of the standards bodies, in this case MAC, like the subfield 0 URIs. And it was helpful to me on some of these decisions to do something I haven't done before, which is watch how people vote and watch which institutions vote which ways and which systems they use. Why? Because they usually have evidence. And if they're using the same system I do, I want to know their reason for voting that way, because it helps me decide what I need to do today in my system to do better MARC and take my group farther faster in a cost-effective way. May as well write on the back of their research. They usually put it in those votes. So that's another place I look. And then we should demand that our record supply isn't giving us duplicates, right? Right, it's not duplicate filled, and it's actively reducing the number of duplicates without sacrificing the quality. And we need to be realistic here. When we talk about that, what are we talking about when we talk about it in the ways we've been talking about it today? Probably 5 years, right? Records that go back further than 5 years, how much are they helping us? And are they hurting us more than they're helping us? Unless it's something in an academic institution that we supply a lot because it's a seminal reference, maybe not. I was very surprised as you read through the methodology section and get into the detail of LRM and get into the detail of what publics are doing today, that most of our libraries have that 5-year cycle, that when you connect it to user focus to what we need to do today in the short term, that becomes a really meaningful number. And finally, we must never forget the virtues, if not the manners in which we executed and engendered the virtues of library metadata of the past, including cooperation, right, the team sport and the cooperation here. If we're going to go farther, faster together, we need to look at how cooperation is being actively defined. And here, I literally follow LD for P. Because what they're reading and what they post and the people that present there, and they have an upcoming meeting in May, really give me direct insights into how they're redefining our collaboratives. I also look at how the next gen leadership is actively redefining their partnerships amongst themselves, with their vendors, with those providers outside library. And then more locally, we need to be watching how our consortia and other ILS and resource sharing cooperatives are actively redefining themselves. In the areas of their union catalogs, their shared repositories, and their integrated platform implementations, including such things as library services platforms, content, metadata, and research management platforms, and other service platform and application integrations. And the great thing about library is a lot of them publish the things and the questions and the problems that they've been running into here, because it is a team sport. And again, I'm all about piggybacking and learning on top of others' lessons. And then we also need to, and I'm not going to go into it in detail here, but in some of our other sessions I know that we do, deployment of creative, simple parking lots and next edition statements, if you will, right, or future known defect resolution markers. We've done this in content for years. We literally insert a tag called Fix Me. I know this is bad. I can't do anything about it today, but I'm in a string-based field. I can type Fix Me in all caps with carrots around it and pull it out of any of my other systems, pull it out of my data. Now, you need to make sure that your data systems do things like this. You may need to keep it in an Excel file instead of in the MARC record, but it's a way of recording what you find at the moment that you do so you can go back to it later without worrying about the cost or interrupting your day-to-day functionality by doing it. And then we always have the time-honored fix of cataloging, which is we put it in a notes field in a regularly constructed string. All I want to say is just don't forget to put those regularly constructed strings in your policy statements because you've put it there. Now we need to know how you've put it there when we move into next generation systems so it can be parsed. So with that, I will stop at the end of 2 and ask if anyone has any questions.
Yes, I have. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I have one from Eva. It's a great question. We have much more data in our website and catalog than what comes from MARC. For example, data about our programs the library offers, staff reviews and tips, library hours and maps, etc. Ideally, we would love to have one search for our website and catalog that retrieves all this data. Right now, patrons have to search in Encore, our website, our digital catalog, our historical image gallery, all separately with different navigation, different user interface, etc. Do you see the next generation, past better MARC, addressing all of this? Complete access to our library data, services, and spaces?
Yes, NextGen addresses that. We can't address it in MARC. That's why it's in all of those other places. And in fact, in the last part of this session, I get into detail about how I hope you start to communicate that to us so that we can work that evidence into our NextGen development.
That is it right now.
Okay. So let's jump right into part 2 then. I see we're in the last half an hour of our session. So now that we've got a bit of an idea about how to address our current MARC paradox and create better MARC that helps us get recognized by recommenders and relevance engines and increases the speed and performance of our current MARC-based systems in ways that help us keep our patrons' attention and attentiveness while we grow our libraries into new areas of patron service, and in ways that help us reduce the increasing expense of maintaining our aged systems and infrastructures while we assemble our budgets and staff to allow us to grow into these new areas of patron service that we, in conjunction with our institutions and communities, are defining, the question becomes, how can we start to move into the future? By capitalizing on the valuable added insights our native library link data brings to the party. Right? All those things, I like to think of it as all those things that we stored in note fields, all those things that we store outside of the MARC. How can we act today to drive patrons back into next-gen discovery engines and other knowledge enablement tools that only library has to offer? And moving beyond the library catalog as a recall engine for a known title or ISBN that was discovered on Amazon, Facebook, or Google, and into deeper learning, research literacy, and inquiry facilitation that drives impact and engagement for the library and its students, faculty, adult learners, K-12 patrons, business people, children, parents, and resource enablement seekers. You've heard me repeat this any number of times. Those should start to sound like personas in user-centered design, right? So I'll offer us a metaphor here. And the metaphor, I think, for all of this and how we do this is instead of a classic that we want to make a reliable daily driver, it's a self-driving car. And just think about that for a moment. Watch Catherine Harnish's Future of Library presentations if you want to know a little bit more about what our next-gen systems are doing here at Innovative. What we're talking about is enabling the user to be hands-free and still on course. It's about endless options that allow you, the user, or them, the user, to decide en route via talking, texting, preset requirements, editing on the fly, and manually entering in the machine to get where they want to go in the manner they want to get there with the context and impact-sensitive help along the way, the way they, to help them get there, as fast, inexpensively, or expensively, depending on what they're looking, with the quality they need. So to do this, let's go back. So, right, it gives you a frame of reference to think about it, and that's helpful as you look forward. And let's take that frame of reference and go back to our basic principles, right? So as we've been saying all day, evidence basis. Right? This is the definition of native from Merriam-Webster, right? What's evidence basis mean? To me, in the next step out of market means to go native. And I'd love to, although it's a shameless plug. I admit it, but I'm going to add right here. The going native, right, as the senior product manager of Metadata here at Innovative means go innovative. Because I truly believe this means if you don't go with us, you have to go home. Or you can stay in your MARC, right? And home right now would be our MARC. We're the only next-gen system that's truly going to native linked data today. And I want to explain a little bit more about that so you understand. Right? So what does knowledge enablement mean? Right? Definition. Anybody that's worked with this metadata geek before knows that I like definitions. What instead of MARC are we talking about in our catalogs? We're talking about things that make it possible for information to be comprehended and evaluated in light of experience and incorporated into the knower's intellectual understanding of the subject. Yep, back to library school, but this is what our catalogs need to do in native linked data. And they need to do it natively in the knowledge lifecycle. So first, the knowledge lifecycle is the cycle of a resource and all resources that we trade around in the knowledge economy ecosystem. And in fact, it's the life cycle that controls many of those resources that Google, Amazon, Facebook, and LinkedIn are using to compete against one another in the economy of attention. To me, that means, I got to move notes out of the, I got to move my chat out of the way. Okay. That it begins at the moment a resources creator and their contributors perform the Knowledge Creation Act. Oh, look at that. Words we know from MARC, creators and contributors. Yep. That's value we have in our system. Thereby instantiating his, her, their, or its thoughts and or actions into a resource. Yep. That's kind of linked data talk, but take it to object talk because objects are the native language of the content lifecycle. And the knowledge lifecycle continues for the life of the resource as it's created, sold, distributed, and delivered, as it's purchased, licensed, and provided, and as it's sought, found, accessed, and consumed. That's what further, right? The first instance of any work occurs at a unique moment in time, and I'm breaking fervor here explicitly because reality breaks fervor. Unfortunately, instances, or those resources, are not recorded, collected, distributed sequentially against the Knowledge Creation Act, right? A person creates it. It's an accident. when it comes into our system. I mean, we acquired it on purpose, but we got the metadata by accident. We acquired it. Doesn't have anything to do with the sequential knowledge creation active of work. That's important. As I said, I'm breaking Ferber. As we get away from MARC and Ferberize MARC, we need to deal natively with the way things really happen. Right, so the flow of resources and their associated metadata through the life cycle is chaotic and accidental. The best, and by best here, I mean most accurately, not against the best we can do in MARC today, but literally most accurately against the things that circulate. The best we can do is assemble a work against this chaotic and accidental life cycle as we record the facts that correspond to the legal and monetary life cycles associated with each instance or resource. Yep. Those things that the sales cycle cares about help us. And as we record them, as we encounter them in our life cycle, once we have enough of them, enough details about enough instances, we can extrapolate back to works in ways that are meaningful to our users. Those ways include, and that extrapolation includes, the common shared attributes of the individual recorded instances. This is something that we've discovered against the evidence through BibFrame 2, but it's going kind of a step beyond where we are to connect it to those things that drive evidence in our life cycle. So what is knowledge creation? It's the act that produces a resource, literally. It's a performance. The act of producing a resource, essence, I said music and math were important. It's the performance by the creator or set of creators and contributes that makes, it instantiates the knowledge objects. It makes that object into a resource. And the first instance of any work is created the moment the resource's creator and the contributors perform the first knowledge creation act. That can be words, that can be actions. It's also the birth of intellectual property law and the moment of copyright origination. That's when we start paying for it. That's when ownership becomes a question. That's all of those things that we have to measure against for real for metrics. So I'll pause for a second. I threw out a lot. Does anybody want me to go back to any of those? But this is what I think native means against what we're trying to do using the evidence.
We're clear on this end, and that I think we're all absorbing the definitions you just threw at us.
It's a lot. And don't worry, guys, you'll see these definitions a lot, because all that evidence I keep promising that we'll share as we get there, we're collecting against these definitions. So then we'll go to the principle of user-focused design, right? In terms of where we're going and what we've been talking about today, what does the user look like? I was going to read this to you. I'm looking at our time, and I'm not going to have time to do so. But we did present this at our Director's Symposium. It's a piece by Saeed Choudhury about how, fantasizing, if you will, but really sketching the outcomes of how someone might walk through modern tools to get to discovery for a researcher. And Anne, I'll send you the PDF, and we'll make sure that this goes out with the recording so people can read it. It's just as powerful recorded, or it's read as it is recorded. And it just helps you get into that user-focused design of what are our users really doing today. And when we think about it that way, then we can move into starting with our knowns, because that is a known. It's a way of looking at knowns. Will that work, Anne?
Most definitely. Thank you.
Yes. So then your next step would be to start with your knowns. And what I'm talking about here is defining your box. And I'm asking you, or making a statement that we may not have made before, but as you outline your knowns, get really local and be really specific. Don't extrapolate them. Be local to your users and your needs. What do impact and engagement, ask yourself this question, what do impact and engagement mean to us in our library, at our institution, serving the constituencies we serve, meeting their needs as they and our funders define them? That's the question that you need to answer as you define your box. Write it down, bring it to us as part of your next-gen development participation, as part of your system implementation, as part of our conversations, right? Your box is the impact and engagement, especially for next-gen, the impact and engagement and what they mean to you at your library, in your institution, serving the constituencies you serve, and meeting the needs that they and your funders define. You just write out those simple things. Think about how much farther we can go. Small box, well described. And then move to the next principle, sketch your outcomes. Against that box, be specific. What services do you want to deliver? When do you want to deliver those services? Where do you want to deliver those services? To whom do you want to deliver those services? And at what cost? And most importantly, at what end? Connect this back to those box definitions and the previous principle of engagement and impact. To what end? At what level is this service when it releases? What does that impact and engagement mean for me and my library today? That gets us to an evidence basis. So then to connect all of these principles back to the steps of real modernization that we outlined in part 1 for better MARC, I'm going to use those again. Start small and address your biggest user needs first. I might qualify that I'd probably define my biggest user needs and I qualify them with what my funder thinks the biggest needs are. Now there might be a dichotomy there and I need both, but that gives me a way of moving forward knowing what I have to do to continue to receive funding and what I have to do to continue keeping my users' attention and attentiveness. Because I have to do both. And if there's a gap between them, that's a really special place that's going to help me define my box and that I know I have to address in my dreams. And then go to the next step of farther, faster together. Talk to your vendors, talk to your partners, talk to each other about these things you're defining. What do you want to do? How do you want to do them? And toward that end, before I hand this over to Ann and last questions, Ann and Bill will close us out, I want to offer a few suggestions of my own, since I didn't offer them in part 1, and I'm going to do that not here today, but in the blog that Ann got me to promise that I would write. So as you get those pieces, I won't be writing this today or tomorrow, so feel free to pass back to Ann and Bill specific questions or things that you want to see addressed in that blog with things to read. And I will definitely read them. I am, after all, a very detail-oriented, I ask a lot of questions, and I pull those questions that I ask into my thought process, and I hope you'll take advantage of that. So with that, Ann and Bill, I will pass it back to you. Oops, I forgot the slide. For any final questions.
Yep. Well, I don't have any final questions on my end. Bill, how are we looking over there in our chat panel?
No, nothing right now. I think that Nannette has really given us everyone a lot to think about.
Yeah, indeed. We've started this transformational conversation about metadata, a topic that is relatable to every library, regardless of type or of size. So we'd like for you to continue to join Innovative as we present these hot topics in our Beyond the ILS series, because we take our partnership with you, our libraries, very seriously. And we want to prepare you not only for the next gen, but we want to prepare you to be successful in your environment with your patrons, your clientele, as well as with staff in your library. Towards that end, we have outlined and posted individual hot topic sessions. Again, these are 2-hour sessions presented by outside experts in the area. And next month, we're going to present a session on usability basics, looking and beginning to look more at the patrons' interaction with some of the things that Nannette has brought to our attention today as we focus on how we're going to begin to change how they get to our resources, get to our programs, get to our meeting spaces, and so on. So Rebecca Blankston will be with us next month, and if you have not you can definitely sign up for that. In addition, my colleague Martha Rice-Sanders will be presenting another follow-up on metadata at the annual IUG conference in Orlando. So do look for us there. In addition to that, we are also adding to our 2018 calendar, and we are going to be presenting later this year our Vice President for Consortia, Tom Jacobson, who many of you may recognize his name because Tom has been a long-term innovative employee, and he is now back. But Tom is going to talk to us beginning in October about functioning in a consortia, even when you're not necessarily a consortia, but some of the benefits of working together with groups of libraries. So we'll look forward to Tom's session in October. I know. So these hot topics are just the tip of the iceberg. We are also going to give you opportunities to dive a little bit deeper, get additional information, interact more with the presenters as we bring these topics to you, and those are going to be in our boot camp. Our first boot camp for 2018 is actually next month, and that's going to be presented by Martha Rice-Sanders, and that's going to be on cataloging essentials, filling in the gaps between what you have now and how to understand what it is you have now as you prepare for the challenges and opportunities that the metadata environment and the next generation products are going to bring to you. You can register for the complete 4 sessions in the boot camp, or you can register for individual sessions. In addition, as you can see from our calendar, we're covering a lot of content. We're bringing to you a lot of information about various things that are pertinent, we think, to libraries, but we also want to hear what you would like to see us bring. And so these boot camps, not only can you register for them individually, if you have more than one person at your library who you think could benefit from that, send Martha or myself an email, and there are some things that we can do to customize any of our presentations for your individual library so that everyone can hear the same message at the same time. So do continue to look on our corporate website for the new additions to our hot topics as well as our boot camp calendars, and you can register for all of the sessions at one time. Do keep in mind, we do realize that we aren't going to find, time zone friendly times for everyone, but that registration for a boot camp will entitle you to automatically receive the recordings of the session. And once we have your name in our registration list, you will also be privy to things like Nannette's bibliography that she promised us. And most importantly, I'm excited, and thank you, Nannette, for letting me put you on the spot and agreeing to post a blog as the more metadata changes that are related to the next generation innovative products become available. And one of the things to keep in mind, and because we did have a late chat come through from Katie, that her system is still on Millennium. And there are some difficulties that might be related to that. But Katie, as we talk more and more about what's necessary to move to the next generation product, you'll hear and be able to understand how to go from Millennium up to the next generation. And we do know that Millennium does present some challenges with some of the data aspects that Nannette has mentioned. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Nannette, for starting this conversation about metadata with us. Do continue to look for, as I said, additional hot topics. Invite us into your library. We offer consulting opportunities where we can look at your individual situation. And Katie, your last chat was a perfect example of what we can do when you invite innovators to connect one-on-one with you. This is all part of our partnership that we take very seriously with our libraries. Thank you, Nannette, for the session today. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we hope to see you soon in our virtual classroom for either another hot topic or for a boot camp. Thanks, everyone, and have a good day.